Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth annual Albertine Prize Award ceremony. I am Gaëtan Buenell, Cultural Counselor of the French Embassy. We may be restricted to a digital space this year, but I promise our enthusiasm for this event is just as intense as ever. It is an inspiration to be here today with so many fans of contemporary French literature for this virtual gathering. Translated literature is rare in the US, but thanks to wonderful work done by publishers and translators, French remains the #1 translated language, and I am glad to see wonderful French and Francophone novels find a place on American bookshelves. In these challenging times, when international borders are closed and travel is nearly impossible, translated literature seems particularly essential. I am so pleased that, despite the current context, more than 1,200 US readers nationwide voted for their favorite Albertine Prize nominee online from mid-October to November 25th. This year, our selection committee, which is composed of the Albertine staff, the book department of the French Embassy, and Albertine Prize honorary chairs, nominated 5 novels, all translated and published in the US in 2019. These 5 books, written by a grey roster of authors, testify to the diversity of the French and Francophone contemporary literary scene and evoke the most pressing questions of our times. While bringing us to Paris, Haiti, and Algeria, they address powerful issues, from criticism of violence towards animals, to observation of the sheer folly of our times, to the role of our origins and identity in today's world. I will now take a moment to thank those who made this prize possible. I would like to extend a very warm thank you to Van Cleef & Arpels, who have been our most committed partner since Albertine's launch. Thanks to you, a 10,000 prize will be shared between the winning author and translator. It is a pleasure and a great privilege to have your backing in this endeavor. I would also like to thank Literary Hub, our media partner, for their support throughout this project and for giving life to the Albertine Prize on your digital platform through enlightening author interviews. Thank you particularly to John Freeman. We are thrilled to welcome you today as the moderator of the discussion. John, as editor of Freeman's, a literary magazine of new writing, and executive editor of LitHub, you are a clear visionary in the world of contemporary literature. Your work has been translated into more than 20 languages and has appeared in the New Yorker, the Paris Review, and the New York Times. Naturally, the Albertine Prize would never have been possible without the Albertine Books Foundation, and I would like to warmly thank his chairman, Alain Bernard, and each and every one of our board members. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Julie Kramp, who joins us today to represent our brilliant partners at Van Cleef & Arpels.
Thank you, Gaëtan, so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Julie Kramp, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Van Cleef & Arpels Americas, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. Since its founding in 1906 until today, Van Cleef & Arpels has made it a priority to support the arts on both sides of the Atlantic. We take great pride and pleasure in promoting arts through education with our support to l'École, the School of Jewelry Arts, as well as all our artistic partnerships to ignite excitement and passion for literature and poetry. Our ongoing friendship with Albertine represents our commitment to furthering French-American exchanges, both intellectual and cultural. Poetry and literature are the most enduring forms of inspiration for the Maison. From the travels of Jules Verne, Plato's Atlantis, the words of Italo Calvino or William Shakespeare, they've given birth to some of our most prized creations. We too translate, in our unique way, literature into precious materials and expand its exposure across borders, oceans, languages, and culture. The link between literature and the visual arts is eternal and precious. To quote our CEO and creative director, Nicolas Boss, When a poem leaves the expected form of a page in a volume and strays into the realm of the visual arts, a jewel can inspire the same curiosity and wonder. Our partnership with Albertine is uniquely valuable because of its role in the cultivation and promotion of contemporary literary talent, such as the 5 authors we are celebrating today. This year, while virtual, we are thrilled to be part of the celebration around such inspiring works of fiction from these 5 very talented writers, whose creativity, vision, and prose have captured and provoked our imagination and provided a much-needed respite in an extraordinary year. We're delighted to toast to the finalists for this year's Albertine Prize and humbly contribute to diffusing French culture in America. On behalf of Wycliffe and Arpels, I look forward to the many more wonderful works this prize will continue to cultivate in the years to come. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Julie. It is now my honor to welcome our distinguished Albertine Prize co-chairs, Rachel Kushner and Francois Buenell. Rachel Kushner, you are the only writer to ever be nominated for a National Book Award in Fiction for both a first novel with Telex from Cuba in 2008 and second novel with The Flamethrowers in 2013. Your fiction and essays can be found in The New Yorker, The New York Times, and The Paris Review. Your books have, of course, been translated into French. As an internationally acclaimed novelist with a strong attachment to French literature, you are the perfect ambassador to bring awareness to the importance of literary translation. Francois Buenell, you also embody Albertine's mission by sharing your passion for contemporary literature as host of the popular French show called La Grande Librairie, which serves as an important voice for the promotion of reading in France. You truly bridge the gap between the French and American literary scenes. Among French journalists, you are considered the expert on American literature, and rightly so. Thank you both for being here today and for being valued partners of the Albertine Prize. We couldn't have done this without you. I am happy to turn it over to the prize co-chairs, Francois Buenell and Rachel Kushner. Thank you. I wish you all a wonderful ceremony.
I am Francois Buenell, and I am very happy to be with you today. Actually, I was hoping to come to New York. I really was looking to it, but what can you do when the world is turned inside out? Well, you can read, of course. That's what we all do, I guess. I would like to warmly thank Gaëtan Bruel and all the staff at Albertine, one of the best bookshop in the world. Truly, it's one of the bookshop I love the most in America. You do a great job, guys. It's great to be co-chair with Rachel tonight. I just would like to say that to me, Rachel's books are really incredible, and she's one of the most interesting new voice of the American scene. I really hope we could make an interview for the TV show in the coming weeks or the coming months. Much to discuss, Rachel. But let's go back to the Albertine Prize. I don't know if you can hear me or if, well, okay. I think that the 5 novels actually testify, as Gaëtan said, the kind of diversity of the contemporary French writing. And it would be too long to talk about all the novels, but they are all great novels. And these are the 5 nominees of the prize. Animalia by Jean-Baptiste Delamot, translated by and published by Grove Atlantic. By Yannick Enel, translated by Teresa Fagan, of the press. Kanja Trouillot, translated by Gretchen Schmidt, Schaffner Press. Muslim, a novel by Zaya Ramani, translated by Matt Rick, Deep Vellum. And Vernon Subutex by Virginie Despentes, Farrar, Strauss, and Giroux. And it is our great pleasure today to announce the winner of the Albertine Prize 2020, Muslim, a novel by Zaya Rahmani.
Translated by Matt Reek. Hi, everyone. I want to congratulate again all the nominees. All of the books were a great pleasure to read. Muslim, a novel, is a slim, elegant, shattered account of language and land, dignity and dislocation. A child recalls her ancestral tongue, a Berber language unwritten but not lost, and her Algerian father on the wrong side of the colonial war. A desert prison is etched in astonishing realism, the willfulness of condemned people. The plastic water bags, a trace of human life in a place meant to squelch it, and the sand which covers everything. No one plays at being an invader here, says the narrator, and not even an atomic bomb can defeat the desert. The desert is supple and shape-shifting, as is this dagger of a book and its artful translation. If you suppress the desert, Rahmani writes, and Reek renders into English, its billions of sequins will fly off to a new home. This book, a grain or sequin that contains a world, has luckily flown through time and space from France in 2005 to Dallas-based Deep Vellum Press today, now. I congratulate Zaya Rahmani and Matt Reek, and I invite you both to the virtual stage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm very sorry that I can't stay tonight with you for the conversation, but I'm doing this TV show in about an hour. It's live, so I gotta go. Thank you so much. Congratulations to all the nominees. Congratulations for, of course, to Zaya Rahmani. Stay safe, everybody, and have a great day. Enjoy. Goodbye.
Hello. Thanks very much. Merci beaucoup. Je suis très honorée par ce prix et je voudrais remercier d'abord toutes celles et ceux qui ont permis l'existence de ce livre et de ce prix.
Thank you.
Je remercie tout d'abord mon éditrice.
Thank you. I'm very honored to receive this prize. First of all, I would like to thank all those who made this book a possibility. I'd like to start by thanking my publisher.
Je remercie mon éditrice Sabine Vespizer, sans qui ce livre n'aurait pu exister en langue française. Et je veux remercier Will Evans de Deep Vellum pour l'édition aux États-Unis.
I want to start by thanking my publisher Sabine Vespizer, without whom this book would not have existed in the French language. And I also want to thank Will Evans of Deep Vellum Press in the United States.
Sans eux, ce livre n'aurait pu avoir l'existence qu'il a en langue française et aujourd'hui en langue anglaise américaine. Je remercie aussi mon traducteur, Matt Reek, qui a tellement voulu traduire ce livre et tant il l'a apprécié.
Without them, this book would not have had its existence both in the French language and today in English, in American. And I also want to thank my translator, Matt Reek, who appreciated this book so much and translated it.
Je vais aussi remercier tous ceux qui ont voté pour moi et le jury qui a sélectionné ce livre et toute l'équipe de l'Albertine Book. Enfin, l'équipe de l'Albertine Book Prize. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Ainsi que ceux qui, à l'ambassade, d'une certaine manière, soutiennent, défendent le livre. Merci.
I also want to thank all those who voted for the book, the jury that selected the book, and the entire Albertine Book Prize team, as well as all those at the embassy who, in a sense, have supported and championed this book.
Mais je veux aussi remercier tous les autres auteurs présents dans la sélection de ce prix Certains sont mes et j'apprécie leur œuvre. Et je voudrais aussi remercier ceux qui participent aujourd'hui à ce prix et à la discussion. Merci beaucoup.
I also want to thank all the other authors who were selected for this prize. Some of them are friends. I appreciate their body of work. And I also want to thank all those who are participating today in this ceremony.
Hello to everyone. Hello from Brooklyn. Very happy to be here, and it's an amazing turn of events. It's great to be nominated, and then for our book to be selected as the winner, it's beyond expectations, really. And Zaya has said all the necessary thank yous. I would like to reiterate those. Perhaps it's not wholly evident how important the publishers are. A book is written, a book is translated, but the publishers have to take risks in publishing. As Zaya said, I feel very strongly about this book, but the publishers too have to feel strongly. And it's as a translator, it's amazing always to be able to put together little parts of the puzzle of a book's publication and its translation. So thank you to Sabine Wesperser, and thank you to Will Evans. And of course, thank you to everybody who voted. That is the final determining factor in this. So thank you very much to you.
Hi, my name is John Freeman. It's a great pleasure to be here to congratulate Zaya Rahmani and Matt Reek and to facilitate a conversation between the two of you as well as with Rachel Kushner. And it's especially nice to be here on behalf of Albertine Bookshop, one of my favorite places in all of New York, with its midnight blue ceiling and its stars. Makes me feel like Le Petit Prince. The only time one at 46 gets to feel that way. Zaya, my first question for you is about this extraordinary masterpiece, Muslim, a novel. Rachel has said most of what we need to know. A woman is imprisoned in the desert. She's reflecting on her life and how she's come to be there. And her father has committed suicide. She migrated from Algeria to France, but it's a very spoken book. And I wonder if you could talk about why orality was so important to you with this story.
Merci beaucoup pour cette question. Je crois que l'oralité est une partie de mon identité. Je suis berbère, je parle la langue berbère et je me suis finalement attachée profondément à la poétique et à la poésie de cette langue.
Thank you for your question. I think orality is a part of my identity. I'm Berber. I speak the Berber language, and ultimately I developed a deep attachment to the poetics and the poetry of this language.
Ce qui m'intéresse dans cette langue et sa traduction en français, c'est le fait que c'est une langue qui est peu adaptée à la technologie moderne et elle m'oblige toujours à construire un lien avec le passé.
What interests me about this language and its translation into French is the fact that it is a language that is little adapted to modern technology. It forces me to build a link with the past.
Et aussi, elle me rattache à des minorités linguistiques, à des peuples mineurs, à des peuples dont la culture, dit-on, disparaît ou est en voie de disparition.
It also reconnects me, reattaches me to linguistic minorities, to so-called minor people whose culture is in danger of disappearing.
Et peut-être pour conclure sur cette question de ces langues et de ces minorités. En littérature, ce qui devient passionnant pour moi, c'est de devoir maîtriser une langue, la langue berbère, mais je la maîtrise avec très peu de mots et j'essaye de faire passer avec très peu de mots une intensité poétique forte. Et ce qui me plaît, malheureusement, dans le fait que cette langue, je ne l'écris pas, cette langue berbère, je ne l'écris pas, mais ce qui me plaît dans sa traduction en français, d'une certaine manière, c'est d'essayer, par une économie de moyens linguistiques presque, de donner une intensité poétique puissante. Mais aussi parce que j'ai l'expérience de cette langue berbère.
Maybe to close on this question of languages and minorities, I'd like to say that what is fascinating in literature with this is that it forces me, I have to master the Berber language with few words. That gives the language a strong poetic intensity. Unfortunately, I don't write the Berber language, but I like to translate it into French because that linguistic economy, the few words that are available to me, give it a power of intensity. And that is also my experience of the language itself, the Berber language.
Thank you for that answer. I just want to tell everyone who's listening that you feel free to load up your own questions. In about 20 minutes, we'll be turning to you if you have a question of Zaya Rahmani or Matt Reek. And Matt, since we've been talking about translation within the text, I wanted to ask a question of you. One of the journeys of Muslim, a novel, is in the memory of the main character who goes mute for 10 years in her own mother tongue and then gradually relearns how to speak this language. But there's another journey in this book, and it's across several different modes of storytelling. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to translate a text that straddles so many different styles of storytelling and yet try to keep it beautifully coherent, which it certainly is.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the things that really makes the novel stand out is an allegorical dimension, dramatic, it's a dialogue in a house, that dimension, an autobiographical dimension. All of these things are there. And certainly those are the things that make the novel stand out and made me attracted to it instantly. I think, I don't know in terms of, it's always difficult to talk about difficulties of a text or challenges. I don't necessarily see those things as being difficulties or challenges. I think some of my own experiences writing in different genres or writing in different modalities, however you want to call them, made those things not seem like overwhelming obstacles, but rather things like perhaps more like little puzzles to solve as opposed to something larger than that.
I should mention that Matt is also a poet, and he translates from Korean, Urdu, as well as French. You've translated one of my favorite Urdu writers, Sadat Manto, who is wonderfully allegorical in some moments and wonderfully realistic. And I wonder if you can talk a tiny bit about translating writers who have such profound connections to a place that's very far away from you, and what it means to sort of have permission to borrow that connection to a place.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm glad you brought up Manto. One of the things I might mention later also has a Manto connection. I think I've had sort of the pleasure and the privilege of living in different places. So although I may not look perhaps Indian to you or whatnot, when I feel entirely affiliated in some sort of deep connection to very different cultures. And that doesn't necessarily come immediately or directly from living there, but I think living in different places can bring that about in a person. So I think of translators these days, and maybe always have been, sort of chameleons. I think of myself as a shape-shifting chameleon. When I'm in France, I feel rather French. When I'm in India, I feel rather Indian. When I'm in Brooklyn, I feel rather like a Brooklynite. So I don't necessarily see it as being something remarkable. It's something that I've always sort of felt. So yeah, I haven't been to Algeria, but maybe that's the next thing for me to do with Zaya's writing.
I'm glad you brought up that travel. This novel was originally published in French in 2005 at the height of the so-called War on Terror and at the height of kind of Islamophobia, which was coming from the very highest levels of the US government, one which we saw resurging again in 2016 with the quote-unquote Muslim ban from the Trump administration, both of which, the War on Terror and the Muslim ban, were not just xenophobic, they were against the reality that people move and must migrate. Zaya, I want to ask you a question about coming back to this novel 15 years later. Were there anything in the novel now that you look at as being more related to the reality of 2005 versus the reality of 2020?
Quand j'ai écrit Musulman roman, c'était vraiment au moment d'Abu Ghraib, quand l'armée américaine en Irak a fait le choix d'être dans ce pays après qu'il y ait eu l'attentat terroriste sur le World Trade Center. Quand il y a eu l'attentat sur le World Trade Center, j'ai compris en fait qu'il y avait une figure qui s'annonçait, qui est la figure du musulman, comme nouvelle figure de paria.
When I wrote this novel, Muslim, a novel, that was the moment of Abu Ghraib. It was the moment when the US Army in Iraq had chosen to be in this country after the attack on the World Trade Center. And when the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center took place, that's when I understood that there was a figure appearing on the horizon, and that was the figure of the Muslim as pariah.
Ce livre, je l'ai vraiment, je pense, j'ai voulu l'écrire pour conjurer l'avènement de cette nouvelle figure de paria.
I wrote this book, really, I believe, because I wanted to ward off the advent of this new figure of the pariah.
Même si j'ai été scandalisé par l'attentat terroriste sur le World Trade, ce qui s'est passé après, quand on a vu en Irak la pyramide des hommes nus qui était montrée dans une absence de pudeur, j'ai été choqué et j'ai eu besoin de réagir. Je ne sais pas si vous vous souvenez de cette femme militaire qui s'était exposée devant une pyramide de corps nus d'hommes prisonniers.
Though I was scandalized by the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, what happened afterwards when I saw the pyramid of naked men photographed in a total absence of decency at Abu Ghraib shocked me and made me need to react. I don't know if you remember this photograph of the pyramid of naked men with a female soldier exposing herself in front of them.
Je pense que j'ai été motivé par, évidemment, pour ce livre, par ce qui s'est passé à Abu Ghraib, mais aussi parce que je travaillais à ce moment-là sur un livre de Giorgio Agamben qui traitait de la figure des musulmans, la notion de muslim comme concept dans les camps de concentration.
I think, though I was obviously motivated to write this book by what happened at Abu Ghraib, I was also inspired because at the time I was working on a book by Giorgio Agamben that dealt with the figure of the Muslim in the concentration camps.
Mais pour conclure, je me suis posé la question de ma légitimité à écrire sur le musulman, parce que même si je viens d'une famille de musulmans, ma mère était musulmane pratiquante, mon père plus ou moins, je ne me suis jamais pensée ou vécue comme musulmane, n'étant pas pratiquante. Et je n'ai jamais fait de cette religion la mienne.
I want to conclude on this question by saying that in writing this book, I really asked myself whether I was legitimate to write it. Because though I come from a Muslim family, insofar as my mother was a practicing Muslim, my father was more or less a practicing Muslim, I myself never thought or experienced myself as a Muslim. I never made this religion mine.
Et Abu Ghraib m'a posé un problème éthique et j'ai eu besoin d'écrire ce livre pour ces questions, pour cette raison éthique.
Abu Ghraib faced me with an ethical problem, and I had to write this book because of these ethical questions.
Voilà, si c'est première réponse.
That's a first answer.
Merci. I'd like to ask a follow-up, because your favorite writers is one of my writers, Richard Wright, the author of Black Boy. And sometimes being Muslim, a novel, I thought it was kind of prison novel. It was a penal colony of the label novel. And I wonder if you can talk about 2020 was a tremendous year of the spectacle of racial violence, especially in the US. And I want revisiting Muslim novel, if it has made you think at all of its connection to a novel like, or a book like Black by Richard Wright.
J'entends, sorry, you know, the connection is not good. And, pardon, qu'est-ce que...
I heard, je vais vous dire, Zaya. Donc, John voulait vous demander, parce que comme vous aimez beaucoup l'auteur Richard Wright, et donc il se posait la question si en 2020, ça a été une année d'un grand spectacle de violence raciale, de division raciale, et donc il se demandait, est-ce que en étant témoin de ces événements de 2020 autour de la question raciale, est-ce que vous avez pensé à un lien entre votre livre musulman et quelque chose comme Black Boy de Richard Wright?
Alors, il y a un livre que j'ai écrit qui s'appelle France, récit d'une enfance, où je dis combien le livre de Richard Wright a compté pour moi, parce qu'à 12 ans, je l'ai lu et j'ai décidé de quitter ma maison et ma famille en France, parce que je pensais que ma vie pouvait être un enfer. Donc, Richard Wright m'a beaucoup influencé sur cette question de devoir comprendre qu'un État peut, et même parfois choisit d'être raciste pour des raisons économiques, comme dans Black Boy.
There's a book I wrote called France, Story of a Childhood, in which I say how much Richard Wright's Black Boy meant to me when I was young. I read it when I was 12 years old, and it made me decide to leave my house and family in France because I realized that it could be hell for me. That's to show the big influence that Richard Wright had on me in making me understand that a state could and sometimes even chose to be racist for economic reasons, which is what we see in his Black Boy.
Ask a question now of Rachel Kushner. All of us on this panel, Zaya and Rachel, have had some connection to writing about prison life. And Rachel, your last novel, The Mars Room, was set almost primarily inside a Cal prison for women. I wonder if you could talk about your reaction to reading this kind of prison novel, having written one yourself.
They're very different books. One thing I would say that I think is a commonality, and then I'll ask a question of Zaya. I think that there is something kindred from my perspective, although it flatters myself to compare anything in Zaya's book with my own, but something kindred in regard to the treatment of gender and specifically of women. As a writer, I actually feel quite free of some of the more known constraints of gender or known categories of the female. And as a writer, I am many different things that all seem female to me and yet take place on a quite broad spectrum. And Zaya's narrator has a kind of rebellious female quality that I recognize. She's, as Zaya said, from a Berber people who my understanding is are nomadic people. And just as they are not going to recognize as fundamental the notion of the concept of private property, I think the narrator also is equally and rightly disrespectful of the borders of gender. So that's one thing that I noticed. And I have a question for Zaya about something else, which is back to, I know we've mentioned a lot this word Muslim, and it is the title of the book. To me, it's not at all a sentimental declaration of a Muslim identity, but instead almost a kind of wryness or joke, certainly a provocation. And I wonder if Zaya, in this book, is kind of pointing out intentionally a contradiction between the category Muslim and the concept of French secularism or laïcité.
Yeah. Alors, il est vrai que la religion en France relève de la sphère privée. Je vais te laisser répondre, Nicolas, au moins ça dans un premier temps. La religion relève de la sphère privée.
It is true that in France, religion is a matter of the private sphere.
Et je ne pense pas que mon absence de pratique religieuse, mon choix de ne pas être l'héritier d'une religion, je ne crois pas que c'est une contrainte française. Je crois que c'est un choix que m'a donné l'éducation.
I don't think that my absence of religious practice, my choice not to inherit a religion, I don't think that that is a French thing. I don't think it is a French constraint or obligation. I think it is a choice that education gave me.
Dont l'éducation que j'ai reçue de mes parents.
Including the education I received from my parents.
Et j'aimerais dire que, en fait, les guillemets dans musulman,
I'd like to say.
Pardon.
Non, vas-y.
Les guillemets, voilà. Les guillemets dans musulman, c'est un peu comme si tu décides que à l'intérieur, tu peux mettre un conte, une chanson, des vers, de la poésie. Tu suspends le mot, tu suspends presque ça, tu essayes de faire entendre quelque chose d'autre du mot.
I'd like to say that, in fact, the quotation marks in the title Muslim, a novel, are a little bit like deciding that I can put inside there a fairy tale, a song, verse, poetry. It's like suspending the word and trying to have people hear something else of it.
C'est important pour moi parce que quand on voyage, on se rend compte qu'au Sénégal, en Afrique de l'Ouest par exemple, ou au Bangladesh, dans d'autres pays du monde, l'identité musulmane est tout le temps différente. Tout le temps différente, alors que on est tenté en Europe de la fixer comme un modèle unique.
This is important for me because when you travel, for instance, to Senegal, to West Africa, to Bangladesh, you realize that the Muslim identity is always different. Whereas in Europe, we're tempted to set it and freeze it into a single model.
Donc, c'est un peu... je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu tout à fait à la question qui m'était posée. Je me suis un peu perdu dans mon souci, en fait, d'essayer de faire entendre une polyphonie, mais la souffrance que peuvent avoir aussi les musulmans qui sont indexés aujourd'hui dans un modèle culturel presque qui serait unique.
I don't know if I really answered the question. I got a little bit lost in my concern to have heard not only a polyphony, but also the suffering of Muslims who are today indexed in what would be a single cultural model.
Alors,
Sure.
peut-être je dois dire que ce livre qui a été écrit il y a 15 ans, et je ne voulais pas l'écrire il y a 15 ans, a montré quand même une accentuation des difficultés avec le monde musulman.
I must maybe say that this book that was written 15 years ago, and I didn't want to write it 15 years ago, did show an accentuation of problems with the Muslim world.
Avec le banishment de Trump, par exemple, pour parler à John.
With the Trump ban, for example, to address John.
Voilà.
I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, to put them in the Facebook Live chat or the chat here. I've got one question here from Facebook from Claire for Zaya. I think now that this novel would resonate so much with readers across the Atlantic.
Est-ce que vous pensiez qu'aujourd'hui, le livre résonnerait tellement avec des lecteurs du côté américain de l'Atlantique, de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique?
J'ai écrit un livre que je n'ai pas voulu inscrire dans le temps parce que j'ai comme le sentiment que le paria, c'est une figure qui revient tout le temps dans l'histoire de l'humanité.
I wrote a book that I did not want to inscribe or set specifically in time because I had something like a feeling that the figure of the pariah is one that recurs throughout the history of humanity.
Je ne dis pas qu'il n'y a pas des terroristes. Il y a des terroristes, des gens violents. des gens qu'il faut condamner et qui, au nom de la religion musulmane, sont vraiment des êtres infâmes. Mais voilà, nous sommes à un moment de l'histoire où ce terme musulman englobe des millions d'individus qui ne sont pas toujours concernés par la violence.
I'm not saying that there are no terrorists. There are terrorists, and we must condemn these violent individuals. In the name of the Muslim religion, these are terrible, infamous beings. But we are at a time in history when the Muslim identity involves millions of people, and they do not have anything to do with violence.
Pour conclure, dans la tradition américaine, et je pense à George Bush qui avait dit au moment de la guerre en Irak, « Vous êtes avec moi ou contre moi », je te laisse traduire là.
To conclude on the American tradition, and I'm thinking of George Bush, who had said at the time of the war in Iraq, "You're either with me or against me."
Quelqu'un comme moi, qui revendique le droit à ne pas avoir de religion comme pratique, a été assigné à l'identité musulmane par la logique voulue par ce modèle politique.
Someone like me, who claims the right to not have a religion as a practice, was assigned this identity of Muslim by that logic of political model.
Voilà, je pense avoir répondu à la question.
I think I've answered the question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Matt, there's a question from you from the audience. And let's not forget that one institution that has allowed many of us, I think, to live during periods, there's a proliferation of new pariahs being created, is of course the independent bookstore. And Deep Vellum is a kind of beautiful oasis in Dallas, Texas, akin to City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. A publisher with a bookstore attached to it. And I wonder about the process of working with them, how you got there and what it was like to bring the book out with them.
Wow. Do I get to name names or I'm not supposed to do that? It's funny to be a translator, I'll tell you what. You think you have something and it's going to be a direct shot straight to the front of the line. I mean, I thought this book rolled the minute I read it, but then there are hurdles and some things which would seem to be straightforward end up being quite complicated and laborious. And in this particular case, it was sort of a conversation turned into a second conversation, turned into a third conversation. And I hadn't extensively read Deep Vellum's Will's books before this. But when I heard the name, I, looked at his catalog, I ordered some books, I had a recommendation. And once I got in touch with him, then it was, it was just, it was a sort of serendipity. We really understood the book in a similar way and understood that it was an important book in a similar way. So yeah, I still need to get to Dallas. We were supposed to with Zaya, this year, but events, didn't allow that to happen. So I was there. Deep Vellum, it is interesting. I mean, Sabine Westpercer in Paris is really a very similar bookstore, similar publisher in the sense of a publisher who is willing to take on things, willing to take risks. And I think that needs to be underlined here. I think people can get the sense of how powerful Zaya's book is, but also how full of risks in terms of what she is saying and what publishers will then be saying by supporting it and what readers are confronted with, whether they're sort of political ideas or difficult issues about identity politics that I think still a lot of people haven't fully inspected surrounding pariahs, or in this specific case, surrounding what many people's stereotypes about Muslims are.
Thank you. Let me just remind, this is the middle of a trilogy of novels that begins with Mose and ends with France, A Story of Childhood, which was published several years ago by Yale University Press. One of the powers of the book is how much it stands alone, but how it also feels part of an ongoing conversation about object and identity that doesn't mean anything to you, that has been placed upon you. And across these three books, there's a question from Zoom from Philip. As a poet, Matt, this is for you as well. How much does poetry inform your translation of fiction? Does that apply here to this book?
Thank you, Philip. That's a great question. I smile because I was once, as a translator, accused of being a poet, as though it was something negative. But I think, one of the things which really attracts me to Zaya's writing, and to, I think we could more broadly say, the sort of the French lack of genres and sort of the very regimented way that it seems to take place more or less in America, is that there's poetry in Zaya's book. I don't think I would go as far as to say that it's prose poetry, but it definitely begins a conversation of what do you consider to be poetry or a poetic use of language, and what then is prose. And it's not unusual, in fact, for me to find myself being attracted to a book of prose or fiction because of the quality of its writing. And in that sense, I mean the way that poetry is evident in the book, even though it's sort of superficially categorized as being prose or fiction.
Speaking of prose and fiction, I want to ask a question. Maybe Rachel, you can ask Zaya. You were asking about Melville, who is probably the most poetic prose writer in American history, next to maybe Faulkner or Morrison. Do you want to ask Zaya about Melville?
Yeah, I would love to.
J'ai grandi. Sorry.
Maybe the question is, she's ready to answer, but maybe I would just add or particularize the question about Melville by adding that not only is, as John rightly said, Melville is poetic. Moby Dick, which Muslim, a novel, begins with the first page of Moby Dick. To me, it's written like the Old Testament. It has a biblical sort of poetry to it. Moreover, two things about Melville that I just want to add. There are not that many opportunities to feel proud of being an American, but Melville actually makes me feel proud to be an American because he's the best American writer. Secondly, one of the reasons that he is the best American writer is that he has a deep and fundamental understanding of racism. And it's in all of his books. And for me, especially, another one called Benito Cereno. And I would love to hear Zaya talk about her relationship to Melville generally.
Yeah, thanks very much. Pardon, merci beaucoup. Mais moi, j'ai grandi dans un pays et une région de campagne en France où j'ai beaucoup lu la littérature américaine, surtout que la littérature américaine. Et derrière la nouvelle, il y a pour moi surtout des corps qui échangent des verbes, du dialogue.
Thank you. I grew up in a countryside region of France, and I read American literature a great deal. In fact, I practically only read American literature. And behind these stories, for me, there are bodies exchanging verbs, dialogue.
Ce livre, paru aux États-Unis, c'est comme un conte, mais aussi tragique. C'est un conte tragique d'une femme qui va tout le temps se déplacer pour essayer de trouver un monde, et tout le temps, elle va buter sur de l'incompréhension. Et elle terminera, on peut dire, elle terminera plutôt à Guantanamo, on pourrait presque dire. Elle écrit ce texte dans un espace qui est un cabanon qui pourrait exister à Guantanamo, même s'il n'y a pas eu de femme à Guantanamo. Mais c'est la fin. Ce livre est une sorte c'est une femme qui se déplace d'un lieu à un autre et tout le temps, elle bute sur l'incompréhension. Et elle terminera enfermée. Mais ça peut être aussi un autoportrait. Je conclus, c'est aussi un autoportrait.
So this book, which I've just published in the United States, is something like a fairy tale, but a tragic fairy tale, in which a woman is always on the move, moving from one place to another, and always coming up against the fact that she's misunderstood or not understood at all. And in a sense, one could say that she winds up at Guantanamo. She winds up at the end writing in a shack. Even though there were no women at Guantanamo, one could say that that's where she is. So it's a woman moving from one place from another to another, always completely failing to be understood, and she winds up being locked up. I could also say, to conclude, that this book is a self-portrait.
Elle a été prise dans une identité religieuse qui n'est pas la sienne, puisqu'elle n'en veut pas. Pour conclure, et je pense que les êtres humains ont le droit aussi de ne pas participer d'une pratique religieuse.
She has been co-opted into a religious identity that is not hers, since she doesn't want it, in conclusion. And I want to say also that I believe human beings have a right not to participate in a religious practice.
Merci.
I said amen to that, to say a joke. Zaya and Matt, I would like to ask you one final question. This book is, because it's in English, a collaboration between the two of you. And I wonder if you can talk about your relationship during that period when you were going back and forth between Matt, what you had rendered the book as in English, and Zaya, your experience as someone who clearly speaks and understands English very well, reading your own work in English. How did that relationship go?
Well, I can start. So, authors are different. Some authors want to be very involved with dotting every I and crossing every T. And usually those aren't the best relationships for translators. But Zaya was very generous and accepting. This particular format brings to mind our conversation, our major conversation in the course of translating this book. I was in LA at the time, and it was Skype at the time. So I was Skyping her and saying, I'm not quite sure what you mean in this passage or that passage and whatnot. And she tried to, it was very helpful to me because she wasn't saying, I mean this specifically. I want you to say this specifically. But it was more like, I was thinking of this at this part. Or, I was taken away by a rhythm in my language at this part. So it was helpful in that way, as opposed to, the overly meticulous and involved author. So that's the first answer I could give to that question.
Zaya,
que
and
je dois dire?
how was it on your end?
Alors, tout d'abord, moi, je respecte Matt, mais je considère qu'un livre traduit en anglais, c'est un autre livre. Parce que le peuple qui lit ce livre, il n'a pas la même histoire que le peuple qui lit le livre en français. Et donc, voilà, pardon, je m'arrête là. Pour toi, Nicolas.
Merci. I want to start by saying that I respect Matt, but I consider that this book translated in English is another book because the population that is going to read this book in English has a different history than the population that is going to read this book in French.
Et c'est ce que j'aime énormément dans la traduction, parce que la réception n'est pas portée par les mêmes raisons qu'en France.
That's what I like so much about translation. It's because the reception is not carried by the same reasons as in France.
C'est aussi c'est une traduction, mais c'est aussi la langue de Matt.
It's a translation, but it's also Matt's language.
Voilà.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Congratulations, Muslim, a novel. Zaya Rahmani, it's been a pleasure speaking with you and rereading this extraordinary book. Matt, thank you for the chance to read it in my own mother tongue. And thank you, too, for your Chamoiseau translation, which was extremely elegant. One of my own favorite writers in French. Rachel, it is always a pleasure to see you. Congratulations on the hard crowd. I look forward to those essays coming out next year. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this discussion. Thank you to Rachel and Francois from Van Cleef, from everyone at LitHub, Gaëtan Buenell, and everyone at the French Consulate, as well as everyone at Albertine for putting on such a glorious event and the chance to have a serious, complex conversation. May you all enjoy the books that you take into the next year.
Yes.
And I think now we're going to have an outro video. And Matt, I look forward to Translator, a novel, which I think will be your sequel to this really elegant translation. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
All the books
Thank you very much.
are available at Albertine Bookshop.
Merci à vous tous. Merci l'Albertine Book Prize. Merci à vous tous. Merci infiniment. Merci.
Thanks to you all. Thank you to the Albertine Book Prize. Thank you all.